Archaeology Podcast. Many thanks to Resonix Sound Solutions for making this podcast a reality. There's a link in the show notes, but you can find out more about Resonix sound treatments along with tons of other info, resources, and products at resonixsoundsolutions.com. Now on with the show. We are rolling into the 2025 season, coming up on 2024 finals with IASCA, EMMA, MASQ, and MECA, and included a couple other finals with ECA and WCA. I am here with Michael Myers. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Clifton.
How are you today?
Doing well.
Good. It sounds like we just recently had some hurricane effects in your part of the country. It's kind of hitting us as well, but we're just getting lots of rain. Obviously, it sounds like you came out okay. Some areas around you, not so much, but hopefully everybody listening to this hasn't been affected too badly by all that. So, rolling to first things first on the finals event coming up, since that's probably the most relevant current events coming up in the next couple of weeks, rolling into Alabama. Mike, are you planning to attend?
Yeah, we definitely plan to be there. This year is going to be slightly different for me because in the past, I've competed at every finals event since 2013
Wow.
for MECA. And then as it shifted towards like 2019, I started getting more involved with IASCA and competed more in that realm as well. And then the last 3 finals I've judged for IASCA.
Okay.
At the finals, but this year I don't really plan on competing or judging. So we have a booth there that will be at finals for Sound Factory.
Okay. Very cool. And if anybody doesn't know Mike, which would surprise me, but if you don't, about almost exactly a year ago, we did an interview with Mike. You can look up in the archives on the podcast, and we kind of go into much more of his background and him working at the Sound Factory, now owning it. Actually, his brother Chris was working there before, and now they're co-owners of that, and also kind of his history in car audio and everything else. And it's just kind of made sense for us to do more together. I will personally not be at finals this year. One of 2 times over the past, 12, 13 years, something like that I won't be there. But work is kind of in the way, and it would just be too much back to back. And this is kind of a busy season, and I've already been gone from the family a lot. So I'm basically going to be on a plane at the same time. So it was too much back to back, and I already did that around SVR and all that. So I wanted to kind of bring back, we had started, typical of me, I kind of started this idea and that idea and then didn't really continue. But we, a while back, we had started kind of a competitor spotlight / eschaeologist focused type of thing. And I kind of want to bring that back to the podcast. This week, we weren't, we're just kind of rolling back into recording regularly again and everything. So I didn't really have anybody there. But so this week, Mike is that eschaeologist, just because he's here and we're rolling. But I'm going to get from Mike, when he has a chance to think about it, an idea of somebody he would like to have on. And we'll actually bring somebody on the show or interview them separately for a few minutes, kind of get where they're at currently in competition, their build, what have you, something new and interesting they have going on. And we just kind of discussed that as far as finals goes and everything with Mike. But the idea there is to kind of get, other faces on here without it having to be a full-blown interview or anything else, just to kind of get a pulse on different people. So I'm just kind of putting a placeholder here. That'll be part of it. And I guess we'll just kind of roll into the ECA and WCA Finals, which Mike and I both happened to attend fairly recently over the past. ECA Finals, I guess, was about a month ago.
Yeah.
And then WCA Finals was last weekend in the Los Angeles area. I think both went pretty good. Mike is the director of ECA. I believe this was the first full season with the finals for ECA, correct?
Yeah. It started a little late in the season for 2023.
Mm-hmm.
WCA basically has a little longer history than the ECA side. Last year, WCA had their own finals, but we didn't have enough events or time to be able to have a ECA final. So anyone that accrued points in the 2023 season, they carried over to 2024. And so this year was our first finals event for it.
Very cool. So I would say, at least as far as the finals format goes, both ECA and WCA are fairly similar to the SQology events, especially the larger ones, where for SQology, for the invitationals and that, we have, anywhere from, at SVR we had 3 or 4 judges, and typically our goal is around 6 judges in that format alone. And then also, other orgs or organizations, bar none, added onto that as it works out. ECA Finals and WCA Finals had 4 judges each for the ECA portion, and then also at the ECA Finals you had IASCA and MASQ. Correct? That was the only 2 orgs, right?
Oh yeah, we had Emma as well.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Emma. So MASQ, IASCA, and Emma, and then the 4 judges for the ECA are done on that, the kind of ECA WCA score sheet, and then those are averaged for an outcome in the ECA finals. And then IASCA was judged by Harold Jones, and Emma by Linda Popson, and then MASQ was by your brother Chris. And then there's also the Best Sounding Vehicle Award, which is given to those that very similar to the Parkinson's events, a hybrid back in the day, where we kind of included all the organizations into a hat to find out who was the top dog there, which Mike actually won that one year. He won every org and the overall, so at that event. But yeah, all those are go into hat. I believe Emma's weighted, just because it has different points, different point scale. So that's weighted to kind of not to give an unfair advantage to one org over the other because of the amount of points that are there.
Right.
And then the overall best sounding vehicle is awarded on that. I believe there was also top 3 cash prizes in that at ECA. And that event went really, really well. I think John Centers, right, and a few others kind of put together the venue there.
Yeah, they were instrumental in helping getting the venue for the event. John Centers, Columbus Car Audio, and a few others were able to help secure the venue, which was a really cool place.
I've gotten kind of spoiled because most of my exposure in car audio these days is indoor events, but the weather was fantastic. We'll go with fantastic. I can't speak today. The weather was fantastic, and it was just really nice. I mean, the cars were outdoors, but we had a nice judging area inside as far as being able to do the scoring, my part, and everything else. And all the competitors seemed prepared, ready. It was just really smooth. I mean, I had 0 complaints as far as that goes, and I was like, man, I'm a little jealous. This show's going better than mine.
Yeah.
I think we had 32 cars in the overall, and then I think there were a few more than that overall.
Yeah, because the not every competitor competed in every event,
right.
So that made the people eligible for the best sounding vehicle slightly less than the overall number of cars that we had at the event.
Right. But I think as far as that goes, I mean, it was well into the 30s as far as I know. It was maybe even close to 40 cars altogether. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was really, really good. So like I said, you, Mike, are the director of ECA. What's kind of the background on that? I actually don't know much of that myself, but what got you into it, and what's your goals there?
Well, Richard and I have been, friends, through car audio for quite a while.
Yeah.
We went to the same judges training for Mecca
Mm-hmm.
back in 2014.
Oh, wow.
So I've known him for quite a while. We started becoming kind of judges at the same time through Mecca. And, we both judged for various different organizations over the years. And, a year, maybe 2 years ago, something like that, he had an idea that he had cooked up through one of the Mexico events,
Mm-hmm.
which turned into what is now ICA. And that idea grew into, certain regional areas. So, WCA is, of course, West Coast. And then he had an idea to have an East Coast counterpart because so many people had asked him for his type of events in our area. So he needed someone to help forge the way in the East Coast side. And Cassie Hall's been instrumental in help growing this up in the northern region, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
and up that way. And then he needed someone kind of further south that could help take care of the, southern states. So he asked me to help him out, and I, of course, accepted because I think he has some fantastic ideas and direction for what he wants sound quality competition to look like.
For sure. And you're, I think you have a strong focus where I haven't and don't and am not good at as far as developing newer competitors and getting people on the scene that wouldn't otherwise be there. Because obviously the bigger events, even ECA Finals itself, is a fairly potentially intimidating event for somebody new coming in, and that person isn't necessarily going to be. Very few people are going to be dabbling their feet into Aggie Land or something like that. But it sounds like your overall methodology and approach on it is definitely more on getting those newer competitors that don't know sound quality competition all that well or need assistance on making their cars sound better and that kind of thing. And I think that's really, really admirable and a cool way to approach it that also differentiates itself from what's out there right now as far as the available events and that.
Because we have this shop here in Knoxville, we get a lot of different, interests in car audio, some SPL, some just car show type stuff. And then, of course, some people that want it to sound good. And so we're able to help steer people to sound quality if that seems to interest them, and, help them to understand, what the judges are looking for, and, how to set up and compete semi-successfully, through our past experiences,
Has there been any specific instances of new people coming in through ECA that you know of in the past year or so?
Well, yeah, we've had a lot of new competitors this year. One of them, Wayne Barron, he met us at the finals last year in Birmingham,
mm-hmm.
and he was introduced to us, and we ended up working on his car. He really was super interested in sound quality because he had been a sound quality competitor back in the 90s and had been out of it for a while and reinterested. So we built a car for him, and he's been competing in all of the various organizations this year. So he's kind of a new one that we've had. And then, Austin McCarter, he's not exactly new now, but, a couple years old. But he had come to our shop through, just upgrading the sound system in his truck.
Mm-hmm.
And back then it was more SPL-based equipment and stuff that you'd be familiar with in the SPL side.
Right.
And, he came to a sound quality contest that we had at the shop. And then, of course, you want to do better for the next time. So, he started slowly upgrading his equipment. and his install, which he does all of his own work himself, and has been really, really successful over the last 2 years at upgrading and slowly chipping away at.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. And I think Chris Pierce has been, coming through like on Cassie's shows further up north, and there's some really diehard up and coming guys out there that have been coming up through the ranks there. So I think it's exciting.
Cassie's done an excellent job of growing that Ohio region. She has so many new competitors up that way, and she partners with a Quaker Steak and Lube up there, and has different shows and at a few different venues, but they have a great turnout for newer competitors, and they even have some of those kind of get together type things. Right. She's done one at her house even, so she's done an awesome job at bringing in new people.
Do you think there's much that differentiates ECA from other formats, or I guess what do you think the benefits of the Star CA format is for those events?
Yeah, so the classes are based by how the vehicle is built, so installation complexity and modifications into the vehicle. Mm-hmm. So you have OE1, OE2, and which speakers are all in the OE locations and so on. And then INT3, you can build, like A-pillars where you have like a 3-inch speaker, and then INT4 is up to like a 4-inch speaker, and you can, do kick panels and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. M5s where people land if they have cut out part of their metal to vent speaker to the outside. Then unlimited is basically whatever you can dream up. Mm-hmm. But this next season, there'll be some slight class changes and stuff that's going to happen. But the things that really separate us from other sound quality formats right now is that, number one, we have a pretty vast music library for the judges to build their playlists out of. Mm-hmm. All of the music that's available in our judges library is available on at least 4 streaming platforms, so you got, Tidal, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music. So we wanted to make sure that it's available and you don't have to purchase from one particular place if you have a streaming service already. Right. Also, the multi-judge format for our multi-X events. With a 1X event, you have 1 judge, 2X events, two judges, 3 judges, and so on and so forth. So the finals events are usually 4X, or have been 4X events. So you get 4 judges for every single car, and judges' scores averaged together to come up with the winner. This helps eliminate any concerns from competitors for judges' bias or anything like that. And we usually publish all of these judges' breakdowns on the Facebook page. That way everybody can see, how they did with each individual judge. And it's a pretty fair way to do it, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't have one person swaying an outcome just because they're the only judge. And it gives a much, again, very similar to our goals with the Eschaeology events, is being able to give that overall outcome and where you place regardless of class. Because I think that's, seeing those trends and seeing where you line up overall is very helpful if you want to keep evolving things on, the direction you might need to go in terms of system complexity and those kinds of things. Like, and be able to look at the vehicles around you. And, I think Bruce Miller was a good example at the ECA Finals, where a top 3 overall vehicle, I mean, he's OE2, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. He competes in OE2 class.
And I think we had the same thing at Aggieland, where Teresa Bruno's pickup, who's in OE, I forget if OE1 or OE2, but she was in top 10 at Aggieland. I didn't see really the WCA breakdown, but I mean, it's system complexity is probably the most fair way to do things as far as I know these days in terms of sound quality, divisions and categories. but it doesn't mean that you have to have a more complicated system to have better sound.
Yeah, absolutely. If you pick a vehicle that has decent stock locations
Mm-hmm.
and execute well on the installation and tuning, it'll place well regardless of class.
Yeah, as I think you've proven multiple times yourself.
Right, yeah.
Anything else on the ECA side of things? I mean, is there anything you want to share as far as what you're planning on in the coming year? Or
Yeah, I mean, right now I plan on having quite a few events in partnership with the Base Wars.
oh wow,
And so in our area, Base Wars, of course, is nationwide, but in
right,
our area, I know the directors and facilitators for Base Wars pretty well. And I think it's a good way to help show a wider audience that loves car stereo, sound quality, and more about what sound quality competition looks like
sure,
and how to compete and be involved. I do love the major, SQ type events,
mm-hmm.
but those usually don't have a way to really grow because the people
No,
that are all there are basically competitors, and
right,
we don't have too many spectators, and that's
right,
one thing that these larger SPL events have plenty of is spectators.
yeah,
So I think it gets it in front of a little bit wider audience. Of course, there'll be some challenges with judging in really loud atmospheres. So we'll have to be careful to try to get some space between where the SPL lanes are being conducted
right.
and where we're doing our judging. So I've got a little bit of work to do on logistics, but I think we've done it in the past with other organizations. So I think this can be something that can help, both sides.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it seems that we've talked about some before, but I've actually had a couple people coming to me asking how SPL can be improved to do better at some of the bigger events and stuff like that. And I'm like, what? Yeah.
That seems crazy.
Yeah. How is SPL coming to sound quality to work on events? And it's like, SPL is kind of suffering some now too in some areas, and not so much with base sports, I don't think, just because they seem to have a lot of stuff together. But in some of the other areas, it's kind of waning just because doing the same old thing. And I think, like you said, both sides have an opportunity to learn from each other. And SQ and SPL combined is your more moderate vehicle, and not everybody wants to go into an extreme SPL demo build or completely ruin a vehicle to do something. It's the same on the sound quality side. I mean, a lot of people have ruined vehicles for sound quality, but that's not your everyday person coming into it. And it's one of those things where if somebody can kind of dabble on both sides and learn how to make their audio better, I think that's fantastic. And there's lots of opportunity to grow there. And we talked about it, I think, last time when we interviewed, but you specifically, your ability to provide detailed feedback that's useful, plus your knowledge and tuning and building vehicles and everything else gives you a leg up, I think, when it comes to these kinds of things and being able to actually move the needle on and getting people to the next step versus just here's a score sheet, nothing stood out, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's not very helpful,
Right, it's cool. And I think with the what has really brought me to appreciate what the Star CA formats are doing is like what you mentioned with the music, with the dramatically evolving score sheets. There's a lot of exciting movement there in terms of working to develop the best, not as a brand, because I think that it's, Mecca has their brand of score sheet that's always been there from the time that I first got involved in 1999. It's a 100 point score sheet. This is the way it is. That score sheet is a big part of the brand. And when you have that, I don't have a problem with that. It's just that you also don't try crazy things on your score sheet when that is part of your brand. And, obviously, again, Iasca has had their format for their score sheet for a very long time. And when you're able to flex some of those things, I mean, it's something that people have, I guess, have had to get used to with me on that, because I'm constantly throwing a whole new thing at it. As anybody who competed or judged, this year at Aggulander SVR can testify, it was like, what is this? This isn't like anything I've seen before. Nope, it's not. But we learned from it, and it didn't. I don't think anything there affected the outcome as much as it did. Spread things out a little bit further, which is what we need because vehicles are so close now, whether they're at the top or the middle. But used to you would have it would be pretty obvious who won. It would be pretty obvious who was the worst, and then in the middle it would get shuffled around. And a lot of times in that middle, that those differences can be half a point or a point in 3 or 4 or 5 placements. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's an effort to spread that gap out a little bit to give better feedback for the competitors there. And I think the Star CA score sheet is picking up some cues from that, and I think we'll see how it goes. Obviously, there's ever evolving changes, but I think there's a lot of cool things there. And on the music, and I've been a proponent of this for a very long time, that in the same way there's no one reference system. It's one of those things where you kind of put together the best of what you've heard in various things. Even it'd be like saying what's the reference for sound in orchestra. Well, every hall sounds different, every venue
Right.
sounds different. So this venue might have a really good aspects for this in these seats, you know what I mean? But you put that exact same orchestra in a different venue, it's going to sound different. And the same in car audio or anything else, there is no one reference. In the same way with music, there's, because of something, the way it was recorded or whatever else, just because it's an inherently good track to say demo on doesn't mean that it's a good track to evaluate systems with. In fact, I think music that has flaws in the recording make it many times easier to use as an evaluative tool, just because it brings those things out. We're not here to necessarily make the system sound as good as possible. We're here to evaluate them fairly between each other. So
Yeah, we're trying to figure out the differences between them.
and the biggest thing with that is familiarity with the music. And we've done it plenty of times, and I've seen the flaw in it, and I don't like it. Where every money round or invitational or whatever you want to call it, it's like, oh, here's the tracks for this, and you all heard it for the first time here 3 weeks before the event, and now we're supposed to do this major event, and people are trying to tune to it and everything else, and then you have judges who have maybe not even really heard the music until they maybe listened to it for the first time the weekend of the event, and that's very difficult to by the end of the event you're probably pretty good at it, but it's very difficult to stay consistent event to event or to yourself if you aren't familiar with the music. And if you aren't familiar with the music, I mean, the great thing that comes with it is probably the most detailed notes system that comes with each track that I've ever seen. And that was another part of it that really attracted me to it, because it's one of those things where not everybody has, like Mark Eldridge in his class, especially, and just him as a person. I mean, he approaches the mechanics of listening in a more detailed way than probably anybody else out there ever. And when you have someone like that, and Linda especially is very good at, Richard's very good at it, but you have several people here who are very good at finding the details in what they're listening to and being able to extract those and then explain them.
Right.
And that's not an inherent quality. It's one of those things where somebody isn't going to know that what they're extracting from that is even correct. I have a wobbly ear now that doesn't, so for me to sit there, I mean, I have to use, software to basically be able to determine if I'm listening to something, to be able to determine exactly where it is coming from a spatial aspect or anything else, to know where it's supposed to be. But if you have, with these notes, when you have people saying, here's where this is coming from, this is coming from the center, this is coming, wherever, this is spread out, giving those cues to listen for, knowing what you're listening for and knowing what it's supposed to be, are all critical in not only making your system perform better, but also being able to use the software, as far as the music goes, the media goes, accurately to evaluate the system. So I mean, that the basis of the music and the notes that you alluded to that, go out, like, for example, that's a big part of why I started working with Richard, between SQLG and ICA, was to have it to where we could pick our tracks for the event and then have access to those tracks for the competitors and judges on demand. Whereas, if you become a ECA or WCA member, you get access to all those things anyway. But without we weren't here to quite put bluntly, we're not here to grow ECA or WCA as far as iceology goes. It was merely just to extract that data and you'd be able to use it to make the event better. But if somebody does become a member of ECA or WCA or whatever, they get access to all that anyway.
Right. And a lot of effort's been put into making these liner notes for each track. So every single track that's on the list of the, like the master list of all the tracks that WCA, ECA uses, they've all been gone through and all of them have track notes on every single one of them. And that was an exhaustive effort from our judging community. So each judge, can make recommendations on adding a track after, the calendar. I mean, the year is over for the finals. And so right now we've already started combing through and figuring out which tracks are not used by any judges. And right now there's only, I think, one track that's not used by any judge.
Wow.
So that one's going. But,
right. So long, sucker.
Right. But the other ones, so there's some more that we're gonna take off the list, and then we'll probably add a couple. But the one precursor before we're gonna add any tracks is, number one, they have to be available on most all the streaming platforms. That way, everyone has access to it, and you don't have to get it from one certain place.
Right.
And number two, that the judge who is recommending this track, for whatever reason, they have to be willing to help make the notes for the track.
Make work for somebody else.
Yeah. You can't just be like, here you go. Now you got to figure this out. No. If you want the track on there, you got to have a reason, why,
right.
and kind of like a roadmap of what you're using it for,
right.
So when we added Billie Jean, so that was my responsibility.
Imagine that.
Right.
No, I think it's a really cool aspect of having that feedback loop with the judges. And of course, it's unfair to say that this way of doing things is necessarily superior to another, because the ECA, WCA formats are in that growing, small community where the core people are all regularly working together. I mean, Mecca was the same way at the beginning. It's one of those things where it's an evolution of growth that, it's in. But a really cool aspect of it is the fact that it is in that phase where everybody immediately has feedback and input to be able to put into the system directly. Because, like after ECA Finals and WCA Finals both, the judges can sit there and converse about the tracks they're using and what they used and how it affected each car and everything else. But I think having that multidimensionality of it, there's, in the same way that I really was drawn to the Emma format because it's so German in the fact that it's very rigid in terms of, it's very exacting on the technical aspects. It has, a very yes or no type of objectivity to it. It doesn't have a lot of emphasis on abstract thoughts, such as depth.
Right.
It's not on the score sheet at all, while not taking away the positive aspects of subjective sound quality. I mean, I think its aim is as objective as possible with lots of documentation and everything else. And, from my end, working at the org levels for a very long time at the higher end, it gets kind of exhausting when everybody wants to have input, not necessarily to make the organization better, but because they want to perform better themselves. You know what I mean? There's a lot there's a lot of selfish input that comes into these things that, everybody wants to sway. And, one thing that really, again, attracted me to Emma as far as that goes is be able to say, nope, it came from the White Tower thousands of miles away. I got nothing to do with it. Sorry. That's just what we're going to deal with. So whether it's, whether it's categories or the score sheet or the music or whatever else, it's just like, hey, that's that, those are the boundaries we've been given. We're going to work within those. And I definitely prefer having some kind of limitations, some kind of boundaries that are imposed on me, going into it, because it makes things easier to focus on working within that as best as possible. Um, versus just having a plain open slate. And similarly, that's kind of why I wanted to add the ICA component to Eschaeology, because it provides some of that framework that has been missing in terms of potential categories, in terms of the music, when that's constantly a just an wide open, wild, wild west every single time. It's exhausting, whereas being able to just have those things in front of you and be able to say, okay, this is our choices within this framework. We can work on it. But back to what I was saying before, I mean, I think in the same way that Emma is very rigid in some of those areas, being able to have that flexibility on working within the Eschaeology Star CA format from my end has been really nice, because it's one of those things where I'm not with the multi-judge format. When you have 4 to 6 judges going together, despite what some people who criticize it look at it, from my angle, I would rather the judges not agree that much. It's one of those things where, in terms of, I want each judge to be consistent with themselves to sort the correct vehicle. But every judge is necessarily, when you're spending 7, 10, maybe 15 minutes per car, there's no way that you can exhaustively give an evaluation for every portion of the system. And
Yeah.
and every judge is going to have a lean on where they focus on, and you can see it. Each judge has a signature to their scoring, and I say this because I've gone through score sheets of literally thousands of score sheets, so I'm pretty accustomed to seeing this. And by the mid part of the event, I can tell which judge's score sheet it is based on their numbers,
Right.
just because they have a flow that they're going by, and they're going to, certain sections are going to score very similarly car to car, because they're really not focused on that. They're focused out somewhere else. So, I mean, having multiple judges, and again, this is where it becomes very important to orchestrate judges together, not just pick the available whoever people. It's like you need that multidimensionality of creating a judge team that is able to give a complete score sheet solution. Remember to drink your Ovaltine. Give the decoder give the decoder to the entire thing. But having that multiple dimensionality of each judge who has a focus on one particular area is extremely beneficial to actually sorting the outcome. And it doesn't mean that they have to all agree with each other. It just means that by the end of the day, they have properly sorted the vehicles. And so that having that, back to the music thing, my point there is each judge needs to be as familiar with the source material as possible, because they have then that potato head reference in their head of what the ultimate reproduction system would sound like if they were able to combine those elements that they've heard on that source material, and being able to have input on that. Nothing is going to be perfect for everybody, but being able to have input on that, everybody we've talked to has that 1 or 2 songs that they could use to evaluate a system completely. And
Yeah.
if the primary judges are able to have input on that, it also helps when you have a new judge that comes in that hasn't had input on that yet, but they're working with a team that has these resources available to them. Now, somebody who might be struggling in a certain area, you can say, well, this may not be your song, but my song is Billie Jean, and this is what I'm listening for, and this is how I'm evaluating that vehicle with this song, and these are the cues you're looking for, and this is the way, you can train somebody else on that if you have the data yourself.
Absolutely.
But if everybody is going, well, I hate everything on that disc, I don't want to use it, well, that doesn't really help anybody. So
Yeah, that makes it tough.
But I mean, I think with the resources that are, even if you just find the songs that you gravitate toward that are on that playlist and are able to use the notes, I think somebody who at least is able to go to some sort of better reference in their car and using those notes and using the music available, they can absolutely make their car sound better just from that resource alone.
Yeah, that's one thing that seems to help, is that each judge has a little input on the tracks, and we have a pretty wide assortment of tracks. That way, almost everyone who wants to be a judge can find something in there that they can evaluate a sound system with the best of their ability.
Yeah, for sure. I don't really have any bias for or against any formats or organization or anything else there. This worked out because it didn't give actually, endorse anything specific. Again, and we had the flexibility in this space, at least for rescuology, to be able to license the parts of that we wanted to be able to directly use and manipulate. For example, like this past year, obviously, I didn't use the ECA, WCA, ICA score sheet as it was. I made my own with elements of it, but and we similarly we didn't use the playlist that Star CA has out there on its own. We formulated our own from that framework. Same in the categories. We didn't split the money around into categories, but we did after the fact provide some bonus money and stuff like that at Aggieland, and also being able to give people, hey, if you had been competing by category, you would have got first here. Congratulations.
Yeah, and it gives them some idea of system complexity really does impact the overall how you stack up against everybody in the whole contest to some degree. You have these few outliers that do really excellent with a OE 1 or 2 system that can compete really well against everybody, but at the end of the day, almost every time the higher end builds or more heavily modified vehicles tend to have the very best overall sound.
Right. You don't have to have a more complex vehicle necessarily to sound better, but it definitely gives an aspect of being able to see what maybe would happen if you did, and being able to look at what other people are doing and see, well, hey, these people are consistently doing better than me. They did this to their vehicle. Maybe if I do that, I might be in a different class now. But I think the nice part about with the money round format or the invitational format in combination with this is that you're not getting penalized for making your car sound better. You're just going to do better.
Exactly.
You may not get first here, but it's not like, oh, if I change class, I'm never going to win, because, well, the whole idea is to give you that feedback to get better. And that was one of the key elements of doing things the way, especially like the way we are going forward with Aggieland. Because if you, which you did, but if you competed at Aggieland this past year with the invitational format, and which includes Star CA, and then the with Emma, we purposefully, and I announced this at the beginning of the year. Not everybody knew exactly why I announced it or anything, I guess, but we used a consistent judge throughout the entire day with Emma, and then also the money round. The only reason is because I had control of it as far as Emma goes. It wasn't like it was picking that format for anything. It was just that I was the one in charge of it, so I was able to keep things consistent between that and the invitational round. But by doing that, I was able to give very detailed feedback with the scoring, because not only for the overall score, which you could see where you placed overall on the day, because you had one judge doing it. When you have 5 or 6 different judges doing a format, yeah, where you came in your class, but the top score in amateur could be a 236 and the top score in pro could be a 193, because different judges. And I'm not criticizing that part of it. I'm just saying it gives it's very difficult to then see how you place overall. Whereas if we're using one judge consistently, it's much closer in that regard. And I gave feedback per line item and by judge on the invitational side of it, because how it is. Like, you get your scores back and you go, well, I got a 146 from this judge, but I got a 163 from this judge. The guy that gave me a 163, very few people criticize the high score. They criticize the low score.
Absolutely.
But that 163 could have actually been one of the worst scores that person gave, and that 140 whatever could have been one of the higher scores, but you don't know that unless you have the data. So I provided, and this is what I want to do going forward, especially at Aggieland, where we can kind of contain everything, but being able to give, okay, yeah, I came out 20th overall, okay, but this judge, this was their median score, this is their high score, this is low score, and this is what my score was. and then being able to compare that throughout to where you can see, well, hey, I consistently did really well with all the judges on tonality based on where they were scoring everybody else. But then say my width suffered compared to what they were doing with everybody else, or this or that, kind of being able to go through. If you want to take the time and go through it, I'm providing the data to do that, to be able to go through and kind of micromanage your scoring and see, okay, this is the trends on where I can do better. Somebody might verbalize feedback. Let's say you have 3 different judges give you feedback, and one person says, you don't have enough top end. And the next judge goes, well, your mid range is really good. And your next judge goes, well, your sub bass is overwhelming the system. All 3 judges heard the same thing, are giving the same feedback.
Exactly. And people just don't realize it sometimes because the words are slightly different.
They put the emphasis on somewhere different, or they were trying to be nice about it or whatever. Not everybody's just going to say, well, your top range sucked. Well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Is it too much, too little?
Right.
And going back to like the music and this familiarity with the source material and that judge's experience, reference experience, all those things can add up to a different approach. They all heard the same thing. They're all giving you the same feedback, but it's difficult to do just based on that verbal feedback without also doing the data behind it. It's the same as when you're tuning, right? If you hear something, you want to back it up with the RTA before you turn around and just start making changes based on that. Because again, what you're hearing could be, yes, what you're hearing is correct, but there's several different possibilities on what could be causing that, right?
Right.
So I think we covered that one. WCA, we did the same thing out in LA. More cars. I think there was 36 overall. And
Yeah.
by the way, my involvement with either ECA or WCA as far as the finals goes was absolutely last minute and not planned, and has nothing to do with me being involved with the structure itself. The ECA, it kind of got thrown on Richard last minute as far as being involved on that. And then, he contacted me and was like, hey, can you help scoring? And that was my role, was scoring. So that's why I was there. And then WCA, we kind of decided last second to throw a tuner challenge in there, similar to what we did at SVR, where Mike and Chris, his brother, won that. And then Mike also helped me kind of proctor the tuner challenge in LA for the WCA, but there was nothing planned there. I'm not actually my role of both ECA Finals and WCA Finals was purely scorekeeping, same thing I do at the Escology events or whatever else. I had no other role other than that. But WCA Finals was, I think we had in the best sounding vehicle, where everybody did everything. I think we had more people doing that at the WCA Finals than we had at SVR. But yeah, it was a pretty good size event. We had IASCA had already done their West Coast Finals in Northern California, I think a week or two beforehand. So they didn't have the IASCA format there, but it was the WCA format. Again, 4 judges. It was the same 4 judges as the ECA. I think that was beneficial both for people to be able to kind of compare the scoring east to west. Is almost like a national finals, just split up, which IASCA has done in the past, where you had the West Coast Finals and then the finals, but same judges between the two. And obviously you're never going to have perfect consistency there, but I think it is with the 4 judge format and having the same 4 judges and being within a couple of weeks of each other and everything else. I mean, I think all that add up to be beneficial to be able to people to kind of see how the West and East is comparing to a certain degree. It also benefited WCA Finals in that all these judges had recently gone through the practice of doing everything and being able to roll right in and be warmed up going into it. I think, there was a lot of benefits there just because you weren't having to figure everything else out from scratch. Like everybody already kind of knew how they were scoring, where they were going with it, and working together, the dynamics of the whole thing. Like everybody was comfortable with each other. It rolled really nicely.
Yeah, it helped with consistency between the 2 events, consistency for the competitors, and then it gives them a little bit of a degree of different judges for each side. So, we had 2 East Coast judges, 2 West Coast judges for each event. That way, one side or the other can get sort of the opinion and feedback from two judges that they normally don't.
Right.
So that gives a little bit extra to the event, I feel like. And then without your help, with scoring, we would have been there much, much later on either event. So you're instrumental in helping making both of these a resounding success.
I appreciate that. Probably a mundane thing for most, but I actually enjoy it, and it helps to get everybody out and get it done accurately where we're not having to recall placements. So all that works out. It was really great weather again. I'm not sure. I guess Richard used NASA to control the weather, but
he's got that technology.
Yeah. Put his voodoo spell on the weather. But yeah, no, it was really cool. It was neat seeing everybody. I mean, it was crazy because it was I guess 9 years ago, about the same week. It was the same weekend actually, 9 years before that. I judged the California Mecca State Finals, and I'm fairly familiar with a lot of the West Coast competitors and stuff. And it was neat seeing how many new faces there were there as well. Obviously I'm more familiar with the now, since proximity where I live, and also Aggieland and SVR both draw more of the East Coast crowd. But so I knew more people at the ECA Finals, but there were also new people there that I didn't know at the ECA Finals. But the WCA Finals was primarily, there was a few faces I've known for a very long time, and there was a few faces quite a few faces I'd never met before. There was a cool dynamic. It was interesting to just contrast, how many differences there actually were between the two. And I think Richard has done a good job at catering to the differences there. He's been able to kind of see it's kind of similar to like Aggieline and SVR, two major events, that I've been involved in off and on over the years. It's one of those things where while a lot of the mechanics are the same between the two, they're very different events.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it was the same. It was similar here where it wasn't just a letter difference between the two. ECA Finals and WCA Finals, while the mechanics were as consistent as possible, they are two very different events. Very dynamic. The feeling of them was very different. Not in a bad way or a good way, just it was different. And the same thing like as with between Aggieline and SVR. And I think it has a lot to do with just regional differences. It's one of those things where you're going to, the way the country is divided up, we see it as one big country, but regionally things are very different based on where you go and the people involved and everything else. So it was really cool to see that dynamic, and it's always fun to visit new places and everything. So
yeah, the West Coast feel has a real community and family feel to it. Mm-hmm. And there's that, all the people, there's not that many differences between competitors. They all come together and have a great time. Oh, other than that one near fight at the back of the shop. But
well, that luckily that had nothing to do with the event. We just kind of got caught in the middle.
Right. Yeah. That just happened on that day. But that was crazy. But they have a real camaraderie that is awesome. And I wish, we do have that to a degree, but I'd like to see more of that, honestly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they're kind of all on top of each other a little bit more than we are. I think we have more diversity between the events just because we're so spread out geographically.
Sure.
So we don't have all the same people at every event like they do. So I think that's some of it. But yeah, as things grow and you have more consistent events, I think, especially like what your plan is with the coming year, working with baseboards and stuff, I think you will see that community grow. And I think that'll be really exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. It's reminiscent of like those DIMA get-togethers that Jason and those guys do.
Right? Yeah, for sure. Tuner challenge, we did that at SVR using Aika Wallace's vehicle, and it had six teams altogether. Probably some of the, if you wanted to put together a star tuning list of people to work on your vehicle, I think we had it. There was, if you'd had a couple people like Scott Welch and Steve Cook, and maybe like David Hogan, I think that would have
add Jim Becker and maybe Brian, Brian Mitchell.
Yep. You would definitely fill things out. So we have a few more people to catch in on the next ones, but it was still a star-studded cast of tuners, and going through the process, we had the base vehicle that nobody had access to or really knew until kind of the last minute. We did that on purpose just so there wasn't potential collusion going on, which I don't suspect of anybody involved, but everybody's going to do their best to win. Everybody's very competitive. So, I mean,
Oh yeah.
having as little time as possible to garner that information was kind of what we were after, just to where everybody kind of had the same fairness as far as the approach goes. And if they wanted to work a little bit harder to get the information, go for it. But there wasn't a lot of information to be had. Is BMW's factory locations. It was, as announced in the beginning, it was the ARC Blackbird using the ARC DNA software, which, at the time that it was chosen was mainly because it had as few features as possible as far as potentially pulling from data collecting sources like RU and stuff like that. Now, actually, ARC has the ability to import from RU, but we had the mechanics separated to where we're using our dedicated laptop to input into the software for the ARC, and then each tuner would provide their own means of doing the RTA and collecting the spectral information and everything else. So there was quite a few different approaches when it came to it. You had Natan Budiono, who has proprietary everything that he's developed himself. You had Jeffrey Howard and Miguel, who rely heavily on like the JL Max. It had Steve Head, who had, I think, every single method on his cart. He definitely wins having the biggest apparatus. Like, he had a whole TV and everything else. It was pretty cool.
That's cool. I would have liked to watch him do it.
Yeah. And then you and Chris, I think you used the Max just for some initial feedback, and then went from single mic and that from there.
Yeah, it was a combination of JL Max for impulse response,
right,
and some face data, and then Room EQ Wizard single moving mic for RTA stuff.
Right. Each team had 90 minutes. So essentially the structure was they had 15 minutes to set up and prepare, and then 90 minutes to tune, and then 15 minutes to tear down. And then an additional 30 minutes in between, just for the system to kind of air out, cool down, and get back to a base setting, which was no EQ, stupid high crossover settings, stuff like that, just enough to protect the system and get back to a baseline. And then once each team was done using pink noise and a single mic in the car at the same source, we just got each tune to the same level based on the same source level. So we're switching between the tunes. Yes, you would hear different. Obviously, each tune had different sound to it because that's what we're doing. But the baseline, we want the level to be baseline between them, to where obviously it's easy to say, well, that one's louder. It sounds, the loudness could enter into affecting the outcome, and we didn't want that.
Right.
So getting the loudness as consistent between the tunes as possible. And then once we had each tune set up, each team had a color that they assigned to themselves, basically, that the tunes were assigned to. They only knew their color because that's how we presented, the outcome. And then the tunes were put in by preset, and then I had a key behind the scenes. So, like, while we were presenting the tunes to the judges, I was the one at SVR doing that, and so I didn't even know whose tune was which at that point, just because I had preset A through H, and included in those tunes was one tune that had just the baseline high crossover points, no tune whatsoever, and then also we had in there Mick Wallace's tune on the vehicle, which was the tune it came in on. Obviously, he couldn't win, but it was one of the tunes in there. So we had 8 tunes altogether, and then it was judged bracket style with a loser bracket to make sure basically every single tune had a chance to go up against each other through the bracket. And then we had 4 judges, which I would probably say 3 judges is best. after doing it. I think, because with 4 judges, you can enter a stalemate.
Yeah, you can still have a tie. Yeah.
Yeah, which we only had stalemate on the first round.
Oh, wild.
Yeah, so luckily, but yeah, we only had stalemate on the first round, and one of the judges ended up being like, "Nope, it's this way," and that kind of swung things, to go forward. But again, with the loser bracket, there was another opportunity for that tune that lost in that stalemate to come back up.
Yeah, test it again.
Right. We had Tim Smith, Peter Steinbacher, who Peter was actually in 2018 or 19. I think 18. We had the first tuner challenge that I proctored at the ECA UK Finals in England. And Peter was one of the participants of that tuner challenge. And then he was one of the judges at this tuner challenge in SVR. He was also one of the judges at the tuner challenge at the WCA Finals. So myself and Peter have been involved in every tuner challenge from the beginning now, all 3 of them. So I guess the next tuner challenge, we just have to make sure Peter's there. But
keep it consistent.
Yeah, right. Mick Wallace was one of the judges, which was interesting because it was his essentially his vehicle as far as that goes, as far as the tuning and everything goes, and he was judging his own tune in the mix, so that made things a little bit more interesting.
Was he able to identify his own tune?
He was eventually. So he actually asked me. We were mid deep, and he was like, "Is that my tune?" And I was like, "I don't know. I honestly don't know because I didn't have I purposefully had kept things out, but." Yeah, I guess he was able to identify his tune because it had just more bass than everybody else's, and he knew it had like excessive bass, I guess. But it was interesting because he, looking back on it, he was never a swayer on his tune.
Right. Yeah. So, but it's just cool that he could actually pick it out of the bunch.
Yeah. He always agreed with everybody else as far as when it came to that tune, everybody was pretty unanimous. Which was better as things went forward. So yeah, he had no sway there, but it was. I don't know. I think it kind of showed the fairness of the judging going into it because with a score sheet, be potentially, doing the bracket style is pretty much just a hood slap. It was this versus that. Each judge had 2 songs that they could pick of their own, and nobody had access to these songs ahead of time. Mainly because we were going to the judging, and I wasn't even sure who was judging beforehand, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do here? So.
Did you use like Tidal or some streaming service to put songs on there?
Apple Music I used Apple Music Lossless on my phone, and then I downloaded each track. So basically, each judge gave me their 2 songs. I just created a playlist with all of them in it, downloaded them all in, and then we went back and forth. Who else was? I'm missing somebody on judging. So we had
Tim, Peter, Harry Kimura.
That's right.
And Mick.
Mick, yeah. Harry's who I was forgetting. And most of the time, as we kind of got rolling, they just used their first song pick. And then if they were kind of like, I'll go the other song. It was like, I'm not sure. Because a lot of times it was pretty easy, especially when you had, kind of essentially buys in there because the no tune and that. So there was a few rounds where it was like, okay, for the mechanics of it, go ahead and get the car and listen. But I know where you're going to pick here because it's obvious. It's like you don't really have to judge it when it's up against the no tune. It was that obvious.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that no tune didn't win. That would have been really embarrassing.
that would have been embarrassing, right? If no tune had won anybody, that would have been embarrassing. I will say, like, Peter was really good at detailing the differences between them and also his thought process on some of them, because where it got really close on a couple of the rounds when they were really close, it was like, well, personally, he'd be like, I think this one, but based on what I'm hearing with the trends, with the cars that are here, this is what's probably going to win out because of this, and this, and he was able to, like he was good at verbalizing that feedback in a useful way. That if everybody that was involved in the turn challenge, and I thought about this later, like if we had been recording during that time, it would have been cool, but it would have given some differentiated feedback to the tuners that were involved. But yeah, there was the one stalemate, but other than that, the judges all agreed. And in a lot of the cases, the judges were kind of surprised that they were agreeing with each other. It was like, oh, well, cool. Did we agree? Did we, it was the anticipation after each round was pretty neat, that they were like, whether it was a unanimous or it was a split. Every time after that, 3 out of the 4 agreed on the outcome, and then the people who were involved, who were able to just listen to the tunes on demand afterward, nobody disagreed with the results. It was one of those things where it wasn't, how it is after an event and whatever, and somebody, a person wins a major class or category or show or whatever, and then they're like, well, I heard it wasn't all that great, blah 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 blah.
Yeah. They flip the table over and be like, this is terrible.
Right. But in this case, nobody disagreed with the outcome, and I think that really, I mean, in terms of the fairness of it and the presentation of it, because you didn't have anything controlling your bias. Even me, who was providing the tunes and the tracks and everything else between them, like, and that was part of it, like, with the different judges having different tracks, they were hearing different things, and even from the passenger seat I could tell, like, man, that's kind of harsh on this song, but it wasn't on the other, on the other people's. So
Yeah.
where like that fourth person out of the 3 might have disagreed with the other 3, I agreed with that person based on their music.
Sure. Yeah. It was really, really well planned and expertly executed, because it was probably one of the most fair things I've ever seen in any audio contest I've been a part of.
Well, that's awesome. No, I appreciate that feedback. I mean, it's been something that a lot of people have worked to put together over a long period of time, just because, there's a lot for the participants, there's a lot to put on the line.
It is. It's kind of a scary thing, because so that's why I'm happy that you kept the anonymity of the whole thing, because people have their livelihood basically tied to results and things from tuning
Right.
various different competitor cars and so on and so forth. So it was cool to be able to keep that anonymity throughout the process, but it also ensured the judges didn't know, and the person proctoring the tests didn't know whose was whose. So it keeps a lot of that bias out of it.
If anybody knows who came where or was eliminated when or whatever, it's because that person gave themselves up. Because
Absolutely.
Again,
nobody else knows. I still don't know.
I don't even remember who was who, but yeah, and I think it was cool how we.
I know where we placed, and Ron and Steven, that was it.
Yeah, it was a fun event, and it was cool. We had more participants and more time and everything else, and everything was laid out a little better at SVR, just because I was less busy at SVR, because I had Lori Wallace's help there, and I also had fewer score sheets actually to worry about at SVR than WCA. So WCA was a little bit overwhelming in the end to add it on, and the vehicle, nothing wrong with anybody involved there, just the vehicle was a little bit more complex because it was integrated and stuff. So the vehicle gave us a little more fits in trying to keep things consistent. But yeah, I mean, it was fun being able to lay out the progress and the outcomes by color, for me, because obviously nobody but the participants knew what was going on. And then in the end, when we called out the colors that were runner-up and winners, then it was up to them to step up and accept.
Right, yeah.
So then it wasn't until then that it was actually revealed who had come up in the brackets and who won. For those who don't know, Mike and his brother Chris were the winners of the 200 challenge. And I think another nice aspect of it in terms of that goes is it was limited 90 minutes. Obviously, a vehicle you don't know, there was a lot of different aspects of that were limitations that someone like Natan Budiono, who does this at a very high level for a living on OEM vehicles, he's accustomed to having a lab and spending days on something and having input on speaker locations and what's input. His job is much more complex than this, and it probably, because of the limitations, it might have lent itself better to people like you who work in a shop scenario, who obviously you spend time on your own vehicle tuning that and everything, but when you're in your situation, 90 minutes might even be a long tune.
Right, yeah. I mean, so most of the time that's kind of like the time frame we're working in, about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And that's what I said at the end of it. It's like this doesn't say that like we're the best tuner, honestly, because some of these guys can probably, like, if you give them like 5 hours, maybe they beat us every time. But within the constraints of the contest, we did pretty well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was, yeah, it was, and it was nice because I mean the top two, three, the final three tunes, there at the end, they all had great aspects to them. I could have listened to any of them,
Yeah.
and it, without going head to head the way we did it, I don't think you have been hard pressed to be like, get in, listen to it, come back an hour later, and then go, oh yeah, that one's way better. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
like that. They were different, and I think it's, this was one of the things that really stood out to me at the one we did at the UK finals as well, because we had never done it before, so didn't really know what to expect till we went into it, and it was crazy how different the tunes were. I didn't expect the car to sound completely different on each tune. And again, one might just be different. It wasn't necessarily heads and shoulders better, but at the end of the day, you had to pick one, and everybody involved did. But yeah, I mean, all those aspects I think really lend to the process and the thing being a really fun thing to do for the people who kind of geek out on this stuff, and something you can potentially do anywhere with a where you have a vehicle, enough tuners, and enough people to judge the vehicle. Like you don't have to have a 40 car event to have this kind of event. You can do it anywhere. So
Right. And I like your idea of scaling it to really anywhere that industry professionals gather,
right,
like Knowledge Fest or what
right,
have you, because you don't have to have like a whole full blown sound quality contest. I mean, it's kind of like a format all to itself, and it's pretty cool and exciting, and it gives people a little bit of an eye opening experience as to A, what can you accomplish in that much time, and B, what techniques are better suited for tight timelines and stuff like that.
right. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's neat too to be able to. I mean, like at the UK Finals Tuner Challenge, I think the winners pretty much did everything by ear. Where then you had other people using more complex. We didn't have the JL Max and stuff like that back then.
Right.
And actually, the event was that event was sponsored by JL. But
Oh, cool.
yeah, but it was still interesting how good the cars were that had, in that case, the least amount of equipment involved. It was just they used their ears as much as possible to get it sounding solid. And if you have that experience to be able to do that, then more power to you. But also, I think it potentially, I think, can help hone, how some of these the devices like the JL Max and stuff are geared towards things, and potentially hone some of the things there where people make it more efficient and make it to a better outcome and stuff like that when it is put up against simple ears.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the closer we can get the measurement data to what we actually hear,
Right.
the better off the whole process becomes.
Absolutely. So yeah, we did the WCA finals as well, and then
Angelotti.
John Angelotti won that one, and he was very thorough, and he wasn't like obviously he didn't come in as a known tuner. He's newer to the game and everything else, but he was diligent and did his work, and he actually ended up, I think he was one of the first to go through and had some power supply issues, and he actually brought in his power supply and set that
Yeah.
up, and he was there hammer drilling in the corner getting that set up and everything. But yeah, he put his all into it. I'm happy he came out on top. So that was cool.
Yeah. It was pretty cool being on the proctoring it,
Proctor side, yeah.
because then, like I didn't know which tune was which or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. And of course, I did the same thing. But I basically downloaded which songs each judge wanted to use, and then just went back and forth between the two tunes that we were doing in each bracket for each one of the judges until we finally got to the top.
So getting a little bit long here, so I'll wrap it up here. But I'll put in the notes of the show. I'll put a link to a feedback form. It's also on the Eschaeology Facebook page. But if there's any topics or people you want to hear from or anything else the coming season, just input it via that form. That way we kind of have it all in one spot until we can work on it. Mike is going to be more of a regular co-host of this going forward, so that way we kind of have more consistency, and it's a little bit more straightforward for us to have a schedule going between the two of us versus always trying to get a new guest and everything else. But then, like I alluded to earlier, I definitely want to still have some guests and people on here, even if for a segment or whatever, where it's not a full blown thing, but at least be able to get more people involved in input and everything else. So, anything you have on that, feel free to put there, and I guess we'll wrap up there, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
How about the ones we especially like?
Which ones?
You know, the ones with the cars that go.
I hear you. Hit it.